Hi and welcome, students of St. Edward's University. My name is Daniel Sabatino. I'm joined by Wesley Harris, Soraya Brandau, Hunter Brass, and Taylor Robertson. We're here to present to you guys over the country of Venezuela and whether or not you should do business with Venezuela. We're going to cover the history, the culture, the economy, and the government of Venezuela. I'd like to ask you guys to hold all questions till the end, and I'm going to begin my presentation. So I'm going to cover the history. I'm going to talk about the early beginnings, the 20th century, and the current state of Venezuela. In 1490, Columbus discovered Venezuela when he was on his second voyage from Spain. As he was on his voyage, he discovered an island called Margarita, which is off the coast of Venezuela, and that's how Venezuela was first discovered. In 1521, the Spanish colonization began in Venezuela, and this lasted up until 1811, when Venezuela gained its independence from the Spanish colonies, and it was one of the first countries to do so. The revolution was led by Simón Bolívar, who is a man who helped revolution Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela. And when they gained independence, they all joined together as one nation at the time. And up until 1830, Venezuela was part of that nation. And then in 1830, it became its own sovereign country after Simón Bolívar died in 1829. After that took place, the caudillos competed for power all the way through the 19th century. There was basically military power was what ran the country. And at the end of the 19th century, there was an international crisis because Venezuela failed to repay loans to Britain, Italy, and Germany. And as a result, Britain, Italy, and Germany invaded their ports and blocked them from doing anything up until they repaid the debt that they had. In the 20th century, Venezuela, caudillos continued to be in power until 1935. With the finding of oil in the country, Venezuela quickly became the world's largest oil exporter, which really helped the economy grow. In 1945, a civilian military coup overthrew the government, and that kind of began the change from military-led government towards a democracy. And in 1958, the military finally withdrew its involvement in politics, which was a big step forward towards democracy. In 1959, they had their first elected president, and it's been like that ever since. Like I said, the economy started booming after World War I because of oil. The price of oil went up and the demand for oil went up, and this put Venezuela as the country with the largest GDP in all of Latin America. The economy was booming and everything was going well in the 1980s. Towards the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, the economy began to go downhill because of corruption in the government, as well as the falling oil prices just kind of led the economy to demise. Venezuela's current state. So in the 1990s, there were two major coups that attempted in 1992 by Hugo Chavez. After his first one, he was sentenced to jail for 2 years and then later pardoned. And then he did another one. Eventually, he became the president of Venezuela. And then in 2002, civilians tried to overtake him for power. It only lasted 2 days, and he continued to be in power up until his death. The 21st century has been marked by corruption from the government all the way down. Currently, civilians in Venezuela struggle with poverty, unsafe conditions, and lack of proper medical care. And the currency right now is very bad due to devaluations. Now I'm going to hand it over to Wesley.
So, my name is Wesley, and I'm a specialist on the geography of Venezuela. And today I'm going to cover the terrain of Venezuela, the weather and climate, and lastly some key geographical features of Venezuela. So to begin with the terrain, so according to some amusing planets, they describe Venezuela in four well-defined regions. So first they have the Maracobo lowlands in the northern Venezuela, which you can see by this picture. It's the darker green areas around the mountains here. And then that moves into the northern mountains, which are extended from the east to west arc from the Colombian border down through by the Caribbean Sea. And then it goes to the Orinco Plains, this is probably the more populated area of Venezuela, and this is the orange area right here. And then from there, it goes to the highly dissected Guana Highlands in the southeast part of Venezuela. And this part is probably there's not many people living in this area. It's mainly forest and a lot of mountains. Venezuela has a total area of about 916,000 square kilometers and a land area of about 882 square kilometers, which makes it about twice the size of California. So moving on to the weather and climate. So Venezuela's climate is described as a tropical. It's mainly hot and humid, and this is mainly because they're perched about 8 degrees above the equator in the torrid zone, which means they will generally feel this warm and balmy climate half the time. The temperatures don't fluctuate that much. They range from about the mid 70s, probably 79 degrees, to about 82. But they do have some temperature variance, and the main thing that causes that is the altitude within Venezuela. So, and this is mainly because they have these 4 climatic regions that they say, and it's based on the altitude. So you have the mountainous regions, which are probably the coolest areas in Venezuela. They're from about 48 degrees, and that's because they're like 9,000 feet. And then from there it descends down to a 6,000 to 9,000 feet area. And then that also descends down to a 2,500 to 6,000 feet area, and then up to 2,500 feet area. And usually as it descends, you'll start getting this warmer climate. But also when you go higher into these mountains areas, it gets cooler. So Venezuela has a rainy season that runs from about May to the beginning of December. And in the low-lying areas of Venezuela, you'll have these major floodings happening. And then you have your dry season that is from about the end of December to April. And then January and February are probably your coolest months. And then July and August are probably your warmest months. So from there, I'll move on to your geographical features that are important. So first, according to Musing Planet, Angel Falls is probably the world's highest uninterpreted waterfall, and with a height of about 3,100 feet, and it's probably the top tourist attraction of Venezuela. But if you want to go see it, you're probably going to need a guide because it is located in an isolated forest. So unless you're fairly expert in going to see these kind of things, you're probably not going to see it unless you're with someone that knows what to do. Another one is these things called tipus. They're tabletop mountains, and there's about 115 such of these that are located in the southeast portion of Venezuela. And you can see these. It's this one right in the middle. And tipus tend to be found in these isolated forests, and there's about 9,400 species of higher plants that are located in these areas, and about 2,300 of these are located on top of these things, which is quite interesting. And then about approximately 1/3 are found nowhere else in the world, which is pretty cool. They also have they're also found in isolated entities rather than in connective ranges like most mountains are. So you'll find these things out in the jungle, and there you have these sheer vertical flanks, as you can see. They're pretty flat on each side, and they tower about 1,000 feet above the surrounding jungle. And the last one is Lake Maracaibo. It's a large tidal bay in Venezuela, and it's connected to the Gulf of Venezuela by the Tablazo Strait, I believe. And it's about 3.4 miles wide at the front of it. And this is very important to Venezuela because it acts as a major shipping route to the ports of Maracaibo and Calabas. And this is mainly because in the basin, Maracaibo Basin, they have these large reserves of crude oil, and it allows ships to come in and buy this oil or sell whatever they want. And they have these things called dredge channels that allow these ocean-going vessels to access the bay and come in. And this lake is about the size of 5,100 square miles, which at one time was probably the largest lake in South America. So today I covered the terrain of Venezuela, the weather and climate, and some key geographical features of Venezuela. So now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague to continue.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Soraya, and today I'll be tell you about people in Venezuela. According to República de Venezuela, Venezuela is a home of 28 million people with a groups of European, Amerindian, African, Asians, and Middle Eastern heritage. The European immigrants to Venezuela came from Spain. But however, in the middle of 20th century, many German, Italian, North American, and Portuguese people immigrated to Venezuela in search of oil wealth. So because of that, you can find the percentage of French, English, and Polish descent in Venezuela. Of various ethnic groups in Venezuela, that you're gonna, of various of ethnic groups that make up the people of Venezuela, 69% are considered mestizo. Mestizo is a mix of European, African, and Amerindian ancestry. 20% are white European, 10% are black African, and 1% are indigenous Amerindians. Moving to language, Spanish is considered the main language spoken in Venezuela, but there are 40 other languages involved in the country. One of them are French, Italian, Catalan, Arabic, Chinese, and other many languages that make up the other 23 states in Venezuela. Food in Venezuela vary from region to another, and its cuisine, traditional and modern, depends on the European side, African, and the Native American. And I have these two main dishes of Venezuela. I'm going to start describe the pabellon criollo. Is this one right here? And it's the most traditional Venezuela dish. Pabellon is a word for pavilion, but always can mean flag. And this dish is made of black beans, rice, and fried plantains. And also hayaca, is this one right here, is a dish that you cannot miss on Christmas. And the ingredients and the preparation of the dish depends on the families and the region of the country, because everyone can add whatever they want into that. This yellow part is a pasta they make, and inside you can put bacon, meat, oregano, a lot of things inside. So, yeah. The last one I will cover the etiquette of Venezuela. Dress for men is conservative. They appreciate when men dress a dark business suit. Fashion is very important for women because when they are traveling, they always carry their best business clothes and always a cocktail dress. Posture is important. You must avoid slouching. Instead of lunch, the dinner is used for socializing and not for business. Business people are punctual and small talk is minimum. And also, titles are important and should be included in business card and address a person direct to their title. For example, if you are a professor, they prefer you to call them a professor. If you have a PhD, they call you a doctor. And if you do not have a title, they're going to address to you as Miss, Mr., or Mrs. Today, I've covered you the culture of Venezuela, giving you a feedback of language, food, business etiquette, and people. I'm going to move to my colleague.
Hello, I'm Hunter, and I conducted a statistical analysis over the economics surrounding the country of Venezuela. Today, I'd like to cover first the currency, and then move on to the housing market of Venezuela, and then the economic well-being as an individual and as a business. So the currency in Venezuela is the bolivar, and it is referenced as the VEF, and it translates into the US dollar as 0.100505 US dollars. And that is mainly due to the lowering of the oil prices, because that is the country's main source of income. And as you can see on this chart provided by tradingeconomics.com, in early 2016, there was an increase in oil prices right there, which spiked the exchange rate for the bolivar. And this increased minimum wages, and because of that, it caused inflation in their system, which increased their food prices. But how the government is trying to counteract this is by opening up borders to different countries to provide more income and fluctuate that price difference. Next, that leads to the housing market, because the translation from income directly affects the housing market, and right now you can see that there is a housing shortage in Venezuela right now. And in mainly the big cities, you'll see a lot of shanty towns, which really depreciates the value of housing. And as you can see in here, I put a graph of the inflation rate, and you can see in most recent times, the inflation has increased steadily, and it is not depreciating at all. And this problem can be identical to the previous problem that was seen in Australia, which the government, what they did in Australia, they had regulations and restrictions that helped fluctuate that. So in the future, the government in Venezuela is looking to change that. And that leads to the economic well-being in Venezuela. So one of the most popular operations, as I was saying, is oil. That's their main source of income. And since that has decreased from $90 a barrel to $27 a barrel, that has affected their exports, which affects their individual income per capita. And in most recent news, the OPEC, they have decreased their production on the per barrel, which will definitely deflate the value of the dollar even more. So in better news though, the GDP growth rate is actually inclining at 6%, which is actually pretty good, but it still has a lot of ground to cover. And as I was saying, food prices and other prices are affected by this. And for the business side of this, as oil is their main source of income, there is a huge corporate tax on these companies, because that's the country's main source. And in these graphs here, you can see the per capita. So this is per household in the country earnings, and it ranges from around 14,000 to now to 12,000, which in other countries, for the US, it's around 50,000, and parts of Europe, it reaches around 60,000 average. So that gives you an understanding about where we are economically. And the government debt to GDP actually isn't too bad compared to the bigger countries, but whenever you downsize it, it translates, and it's not too well. I'm now going to pass it off to my colleague. Today, I covered the currency of Venezuela, which is definitely depreciating. And then I covered the housing market of Venezuela, which is likewise. And then I covered the economic well-being for individuals and corporations. I will now pass it on to my colleague.
Hello everyone, my name is Taylor, and over the summer I had the opportunity to do an internship in Venezuela for a business company there. And today I'm going to talk to you about the government, including its current structure, as well as implications they're facing right now, and also their power of control within the business market. So to start off with the government structure, according to the CIA, Venezuela has 3 branches within its government: the executive, legislative, as well as the judicial. In the executive branch, there is the president, the vice president, and their cabinet called the Council of Members. Currently, the president of Venezuela is Nicolas Maduro, who is here right behind me. And he began his presidency in 2013 with the next election occurring in either 2018 or 2019. However, that is still up to debate of when it will actually occur. In the legislative branch, it is called the National Assembly, and there are 167 seats in that assembly. As of right now, 112 of those seats are held by MUD, which is the Democratic Unity Table political party, and the rest of the 55 seats is held by the PSUV, which is the United Political Social Party of Venezuela, which is the political party that the current president is associated with. And lastly, there's the judicial branch, which is called the Supreme Tribunal of Justices. There are 32 judges, and these judges separate out into 6 different divisions, and each division focuses on just like a specific aspect of issues happening in their country, like labor issues or business issues and things of that nature. Next, I'm going to go into struggles that the government is facing. As of right now, a lot of claims that you probably have heard is that there is a high dislike for the current president, as well as the socialism that the country is experiencing. But according to the nation, there are other problems as well, including the currency crisis, of which Hunter talked about in more detail earlier, as well as their high dependency on oil. As of right now, 96% of their exports and half of the government revenue all comes from oil. So finding different ways to get that revenue is being shown quite a struggle. And another issue is the corruption. In 2015, Venezuela was actually ranked as the 10th most corrupt country in the world. So that's another issue the government is trying to tackle. But apparently, according to the government, their main concern is also this economic war that's happening to them that was created by private businesses as well as the United States. And lastly, I'm going to cover how in-depth their power is in the business market. According to heritage.org, their business climate is extremely hostile for many reasons. For one, in 2014, the president passed a decree that actually restricted the rights of foreign investors, which doesn't look good for them, for international businesses wanting to interact with them. And on top of that, private businesses in the country are tightly controlled by the government, restricting what they can do, what decisions they can make, and things like that. And also the currency control is affecting how international businesses stationed there can actually transfer their